My name is Dr. Francis, and I am 71 years old. And for 40 years, I was the steadiest voice in any operating room I ever walked into. The one terrified parents prayed would come through the door. So on the morning my own son drove out of the Cedar Hollow parking lot and left me standing there, while a nurse fastened a plastic band around my wrist and told me in a gentle voice that it was perfectly normal to feel a little confused, I understood exactly what my family had done. They had arranged to have me declared too far gone to know my own name. And they had no idea who they had just locked away. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please, stay with me until the end.
To understand how a woman like me ends up in a place like that, you have to know who I was long before love ever clouded my judgment. For most of my life, I was the person other people called when a child's heart was failing. I am a pediatric cardiac surgeon. I spent close to 4 decades at the table, repairing hearts no bigger than a strawberry, holding them between 2 fingers while a whole family waited on the other side of a door, praying to a God I hoped was listening. I founded the Queen City Children's Heart Center here in Cincinnati back when people told me a woman would never raise the money or earn the trust to run a place like that. I raised it, I earned it, and I built something that outlived every man who ever doubted me. I still remember a night early in my career, a baby boy who came to me blue and barely breathing, his mother so young she could not stop shaking in the hallway. His heart was the size of a walnut and it was quitting on him. I worked on that child for 9 hours. At one point, my own hands were the only thing standing between that little boy and the end of everything his mother had ever wanted. He lived. He is a grown man now, somewhere out there, and his mother never forgot my name. Hold on to that because it matters later in ways you cannot imagine yet. If you walked into my study today, the first thing you would notice is the wall. Hundreds of cards and photographs, corner to corner, floor to ceiling, a boy in a baseball uniform who was blue at birth, a girl blowing out candles on a cake, 16 of them now, who once fit inside the palm of my hand. Every single one of them is a kid who got to grow up because of a morning I spent in scrubs instead of at home. I used to look at that wall and feel nothing but pride. Lately, I look at it and I feel something more complicated because every card up there is also a quiet reminder of a chair that sat empty at my own dinner table. I did not start out wealthy. I built it slowly, the way you build anything meant to last. The surgeon's income, yes, but more than that, the centers I opened and later sold a stake in, the lake cabin up north that I designed myself, every beam of it, because I never could stop fixing things with my own 2 hands. There is a scholarship with my name on it at the medical school. There is more money sitting in trusts and accounts than any sensible woman knows what to do with. I am not telling you this to brag. I am telling you because money is the thing my family eventually came to see whenever they looked at me, in place of seeing a person. But I am getting ahead of myself. The reason I went into hearts in the first place is the reason for everything that came after. My husband Ted died when our son was just 5 years old. It was a heart attack, fast and merciless, on an ordinary Tuesday in 1990. He was 38. I was a general surgeon then, good with my hands, quick on my feet, and not one bit of it mattered. I was in the middle of an operation I could not walk away from when his heart gave out across town, and by the time I scrubbed out and reached that emergency room, my husband was already gone. I have restarted 1,000 hearts since that day. I could not restart the one heart I would have traded everything for. So I went back, I retrained, and I spent the rest of my life making sure other mothers would not have to learn the thing I learned standing in that hallway. Here is the part I am not proud of. I poured myself into that mission so completely that I let my own boy grow up around the edges of it. Wesley learned to ride a bike with a nanny holding the seat. My mother sat in the front row at his school plays, while I stood in an intensive care unit watching a monitor. There was a championship game his senior year, the one he still brings up, and I missed it because a 9-year-old on my table coded twice, and I would not leave her. I saved that little girl. I have never once regretted saving her, but I came home that night to a boy who would not look at me, and I told myself he would understand someday. He did not understand. And the truth is, I never could read him the way I could read a heart. I could glance at a screen and know a child was about to crash 3 minutes before it happened. I never saw what was quietly failing in my own son until it had already gone too far to fix. Wesley grew up handsome and charming and allergic to anything that asked him to stay. As a young man, he had a dozen beginnings and almost no endings. A landscaping company that lasted exactly one summer, a real estate license he let go dead, a buddy startup he swore up and down was the next big thing, right until the week it went belly up. He always had what he liked to call irons in the fire. Whenever I gently asked how the irons were coming along, he would flash that grin of his and say, "Mom, you worry way too much. I've got a couple things cooking. It's all about timing." And because I loved him, and because somewhere deep down I still felt I owed him for all those empty chairs, I kept the fire lit for him with my own money, year after year. When he met Sloan, I let myself hope. She was bright and organized, and she ran their home like a small business. She had worked in pharmaceutical sales before the children came, so she knew her way around numbers and labels, and for a while I honestly believed she might be the anchor my son had been missing his whole life. Then the babies arrived, my grandson Beckett, and 5 years later my granddaughter Wren, and Sloan discovered a different calling. She built what she always called the brand. Their entire life became content. The matching outfits, the spotless kitchen island, the vacations photographed from 40 angles before a single person was allowed to actually enjoy them. She would say things like, "Honestly, Francis, this trip is really an investment in our engagement numbers." And I would nod along like I understood, when the only number I truly understood was the one on the invoice that always landed on me. It crept up the way these things always do, 1 inch at a time, so slowly that no single moment ever felt wrong. First, it was the down payment on the house, a gift given gladly. Then it was the children's private tuition because the public school in their districts was, in Sloan's words, just not it. Then it was the new SUV because the old one was giving her anxiety merging onto the highway. Each request showed up, wrapped neatly in love and good reasons, and each one I granted without blinking. And somewhere along that road, the thank you got shorter while the next ask got bigger. We went from a family that was grateful to a family that simply assumed. I never noticed the exact day it flipped. I only noticed a long time later that it had. I remember the SUV conversation in particular. Sloan sat at my kitchen table with her phone face up, already showing me the model she wanted, and Wesley leaned against the counter, not quite meeting my eyes. She said, "We found the perfect one. It's basically a steal at this price," and Wes added, "It's really more of a safety thing for the kids, Mom." There was no actual question anywhere in it. It was already decided. The only thing left undecided was whether I would feel like the villain for hesitating. I wrote the check. I always wrote the check. That, I have come to understand, was the whole arrangement. My oldest friend saw it long before I did. Loretta Vance and I scrubbed in together for 30 years before she retired, and there is not a living soul who can read me better. We used to have lunch every single Thursday. Same booth, same terrible diner coffee, same arguments we both enjoyed too much to ever settle. Then one Thursday I canceled because Sloan deeded me to watch the kids. And the Thursday after that, there was a family thing. And after a couple of months of this, Loretta called me up and cut straight to it. "Frankie," she said, "I'm going to ask you one question, and I want a straight answer for once. When is the last time you did a single thing that was just for you?" I laughed it off. I told her I was fine, that this was simply what family looks like at my age. She went quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Honey, I am not so sure that is family I am looking at. I am not so sure that is family at all." I changed the subject. I would give a great deal now to go back and not change the subject. There was something else too, something I told absolutely no one, because saying it out loud made me feel like the very old woman they were already starting to treat me as. I had begun to lose my words. I would be right in the middle of a sentence and the floor would simply drop out from under the thought, and I would stand there in my own kitchen reaching for a word a child of 7 could find. I would forget whether I had taken my pills, then open the little daily case and discover it already empty. Some mornings, the whole world arrived as if through a pane of frosted glass. I was 71 years old. I told myself this was just the going rate for the years. Sloane had me on a new regimen by then, a whole cabinet of supplements she absolutely swore by, and she was so tender about it, lining up my vitamins in their little case every Sunday so I would never have to think about it myself. "Don't you worry about a thing," she would say, sliding the case across the counter toward me. "I've got you, Frances. I've got you." And I believed her. That was my first real mistake, and it is the one I still cannot fully forgive myself for, because the fog was never my age at all. The fog had a source, and the source was standing right there in my kitchen, smiling while she filled my pill case Sunday after Sunday. But I am getting ahead of myself again, because before they could carry me out of my own life and through the doors of a locked ward, they first had to convince me, and very nearly convince every single person around me, that the surgeon who once held dying children's hearts in her hands could no longer be trusted to hold her own. It began the way the worst things so often do, with kindness. At first, the little comments were soft and almost loving. At a Sunday dinner, I started telling a story about Beckett's first soccer game, and Sloane reached over, patted the back of my hand, and said gently, "Frances, sweetie, you told us this exact one last week, but it's a cute story. Go ahead." Everyone smiled. I laughed at myself. It was nothing, except the very next week there was another nothing, and the week after that another. And slowly I began to notice that the moment I opened my mouth at that table, my son and his wife would trade a quick little glance first, the kind of glance you give over the head of a child who is about to embarrass himself in front of company. Then came the afternoon I got turned around driving home from their house. I had made that drive a few hundred times. That day, the streets simply rearranged themselves on me, and I ended up 2 towns over, sitting at a stop sign I did not recognize, with my heart going like a fist on a door. It came back to me eventually. I found my way home. I told no one, but I think Sloane already knew somehow, because right around then, the phone calls picked up, all of them so concerned, always asking how I was sleeping, whether I was eating enough, whether I had been feeling foggy lately. Real concern feels like a warm hand. This felt like a thermometer slid under my tongue. I just was not ready yet to admit which one it actually was. What I did not see was that the same story was being told about me everywhere except to my face. A neighbor I had known for years started speaking to me a little slower, a little louder, the way you talk to someone who is going. A woman from my old church asked Sloane, right in front of me, how I was holding up, as if I were not standing 2 feet away with a perfectly good set of ears. My family was not only watching me decline, they were narrating it kindly, patiently to anyone who would listen, building a record one sympathetic conversation at a time. Then one evening, Sloane arrived with a folder, a pen, and that careful voice people use when they have rehearsed something in the car. She sat me down at my own table and said, "Frances, Wes, and I have been talking, and we just want to make sure that if anything ever happened to you, God forbid, we could step right in and handle things. The bills, the accounts, all the boring stuff, so it never falls on you." She slid a power of attorney across the table toward me. "It's totally standard," she said. "Everybody your age has one. Honestly, it's just peace of mind." Over by the window, Wesley added, "It's no big deal, Mom. It just means that if you ever land in the hospital, we're not stuck on hold with the bank for 3 hours trying to prove who we are." They were so reasonable. They were always, always so reasonable. And I was tired, and I was guilty about all those empty chairs, and I signed. I signed a financial power of attorney that night, believing it was a fire extinguisher I would never need to take off the wall. I did not understand that I had just handed them the matches. Loretta came by that same week, and the second she laid eyes on the supplement cabinet, she went very still. "Frankie," she said, "who set all of this up." I told her Sloane had that she was only being helpful. Loretta picked up one of the bottles, turned over in her hand, set it back down, and then looked at me with 30 years of operating rooms in her eyes. "Honey," she said, "I have watched you read a room since back when we were both young and dead broke. So read this one. They have got your money, they have got your medicine, and they have got you canceling lunch with the one person on this earth who would notice the day you went missing. I am not going to tell you what that is. I am telling you to open your eyes and look at it. I told her she was being paranoid. I told her they loved me. And then that night, lying alone in the dark, I could not sleep because some old surgeon's instinct, the very same one that used to snap me awake 3 minutes before a child ever crashed, was wide awake now and refusing to shut its mouth. So the next morning, I did one quiet thing. I've called Harlan Voss, my lawyer of 25 years, and without breathing a word to a single member of my family, I asked him to lock down everything that mattered. Not because I truly believed my son would rob me. I could not let myself believe that, not yet. But the way I saw it then, the absolute worst case was a fight over money, and I had spent my entire life making certain that no one on God's green earth could take my money from me. Harlan, I said, I want every important thing I own wrapped up tight, somewhere no power of attorney can ever reach the heart of it. He asked me very carefully whether everything was all right at home. I told him it was fine. I was bracing for the wrong disaster entirely. It never once crossed my mind that the thing my family wanted was not my fortune at all. It was my freedom. The fall came on a Saturday. I had taken the little case of vitamins Sloan filled for me, the same as every morning, and by early afternoon the room had begun to tilt, slow and sickening, like the deck of a boat. I remember reaching for the back of the couch. I remember my legs simply deciding they were done, and I remember strangely that Sloan was right there, already on her phone, already saying the words into it. My mother-in-law has collapsed. She's been so confused lately. Please hurry. She had not collapsed before that day in 71 years. She collapsed on the one afternoon. There happened to be a witness with a phone in her hand and a story already loaded on her tongue. At the hospital, a young emergency doctor, clearly running on no sleep and doing his level best, stood and listened while Sloan painted him months of forgetting, of wandering, of a sharp old woman slipping away by inches. He never ran a single real cognitive test. He simply wrote into my chart the words that would become the nail in my coffin. Patient presents with possible cognitive decline. Recommend further evaluation. Why on earth would he doubt her? She was the devoted daughter-in-law with tears in her eyes, and I was the dizzy old woman flat on a gurney, too drugged in that moment to string together one clean sentence in my own defense. I tried. Even half sedated, the surgeon in me knew exactly how badly I was failing to sound like myself, and that knowledge was its own kind of terror. That was when they made their pitch. Sloan took my hand in the hospital room, so warm, so gentle, and said, Francis, we found this beautiful place, Cedar Hollow. It's honestly more like a resort than anything. And we were thinking maybe you could just stay there a little while, let them do a proper evaluation, take all this pressure off your shoulders. Wes nodded along from the foot of the bed and said, We're not shipping you off. Mom, comin'. It's just for peace of mind, just a few days so we also stop worrying ourselves sick. And here is the cruelest part, the part I am ashamed of even now. For one long moment, I wondered if they were right, because I had been losing words. I had gotten lost 2 towns over. I had gone down in my own living room. When you cannot trust your own mind, the people offering to think for you start to sound like mercy. There was one person in that hospital room who did not perform. Beckett, my grandson, 14 years old and quiet as ever, hung back by the door the whole time, watching his mother work, his jaw tight in a way I had never seen on a boy that young. On the way out, he drifted over to my bed, leaned down close, and said in a low voice, Just for me, Grandma, you seem totally fine to me. Then he hesitated, glanced back at his mom, and added, Hey, can I ask you something? Why do you take so many new vitamins now? Mom mixes some powder into yours that she doesn't put in anybody else's. I was floating somewhere above myself on whatever they had given me, and the words slid right past me like everything else that day. I have thought about that boy and that question every single day since. He handed me the answer to the whole thing right there in that room, and I was too foggy to catch it. In the end, I told them I would go and look at the place. Just look. Just a tour. I said nothing more, and Sloan squeezed my hand and said, Of course, Francis. Just a tour, whatever you're comfortable with. I told myself I was only doing it to keep the peace, to quiet everyone down, to prove I had nothing to hide. I told myself I would walk through those doors on my own 2 feet and walk right back out the same way. That small old voice, the surgeon's voice, was screaming at me not to get in that car. For the first time in my life, I did not listen to it. The drive out to Cedar Hollow took about 40 minutes, and for most of it, I almost let myself relax. The place did not look like anything to be afraid of. There was a long drive lined with old maples, a stone fountain out front, flower beds someone clearly fussed over. It looked, just as Sloane had promised, more like a quiet little resort than anything else. "See," she said brightly from the front seat. "Isn't it gorgeous? I told you it was nice." And God help me, I felt the knot in my chest loosen a notch. I thought, this is just a tour. I thought, I am being paranoid. Loretta has gotten into my head. These are my people, and they are only trying to help. That is the thing about a well-built trap. It does not feel like teeth closing. It feels like a soft place to finally sit down. Inside, the lobby was warm and smelled like lemon polish, and a kind-looking woman rose from behind the front desk the moment we walked in. But she did not greet me the way you greet a visitor on a tour. She greeted me the way you greet an arrival. "We've been expecting you, Frances," she said warmly. "We have your room all ready for you, your room, not the tour, not the visit, my room." And the floor began to tilt under me again, except this time it had nothing at all to do with anything in my pill case. "I am only here to look," I told her, and I heard my own voice come out smaller than I wanted it to. "I'm only here to see the place." The woman gave me the gentlest smile, the kind you would give a frightened child, and then she did the thing I will never forget. She looked past me, at Sloane, and the two of them shared a small nod, an entire conversation in half a second, the conversation of two people who had already spoken before I ever walked through that door. Because they had. I found out later, in pieces, what Sloane had told the staff in advance, and I caught the shape of it right there in that lobby when an aide murmured something to the nurse. And the nurse murmured back, "She may insist she isn't staying. That's noted. We'll keep her settled." They had been briefed. My daughter-in-law had stood in that building before I ever arrived and explained, sweetly, professionally, that the poor woman coming in on Saturday suffered from a real decline, that she would deny every bit of it, that she would very likely announce she was a famous surgeon and demand to leave, and that none of it should be taken seriously because that, you see, was simply the disease talking. She had preloaded my every true word as a symptom. Whatever I said in there, the more clearly I said it, the sicker I would sound. I turned to Sloane and I said as evenly as I could, "What is this? What did you tell these people?" And she put her warm hand on my arm and used the same voice she used on her followers, that smooth, sympathetic, camera-ready voice. And she said, "Frances, nobody is doing anything to you. We just want you somewhere safe while they figure out what's going on with you." Okay. Then she leaned in toward the nurse and lowered her voice, though not nearly enough, and added, "She gets agitated like this. She'll tell you she's a heart surgeon. Just keep her comfortable. It's all in the doctor's notes." "I'm a heart surgeon," I said. "I founded a children's heart center." The nurse wrote something down. She did not write it as a fact. She wrote it as a behavior. I looked for my son. Wesley was standing a few feet back near a fake potted tree, and he would not lift his eyes to meet mine. "Wes," I said, "look at me." And when he finally did, what I saw on his face was not cruelty. That is the part that has haunted me most. It was shame and weakness, and a man who had let his wife do his thinking for so many years that he no longer knew how to stop her. "Mom," he said, almost too quiet to hear, "please, just give it a few days. All right. The doctor said you need to be evaluated. Just let them check you out, and then we'll talk." He believed it. That is what I understood in that moment and would not fully understand for weeks. My son thought this was real. He thought there was a sick mother in front of him and a kind place to keep her safe, because that is the story he had been fed, and he had swallowed it whole rather than look too closely at the woman feeding it to him. They began to walk me down a hallway toward a set of double doors, the nurse on one side, an aide on the other, both of them so gentle, both of them immovable. I reached into my purse for my phone to call Loretta, to call Harlan, to call anyone, and my phone was not there. Sloane said, "Oh, I've got it. On, you kept misplacing it. I'll keep it safe for you." My accounts were already frozen behind the power of attorney I had signed at my own kitchen table. I had no phone. I had no money I could reach. I could not have called a cab to the end of the driveway if you had set me loose in the parking lot. In the space of an afternoon, a woman worth more than most of that town, a woman who had built and run institutions, had been reduced to someone who could not make a single phone call. The double doors had a keypad. The aide punched in a code. The lock released with a soft electronic chirp, and they walked me through, and then the doors closed behind me, and the lock chirped again, and I was on the inside of it. I turned around in time to see, through the narrow window in the door, my son and his wife walking back toward the lobby, toward the parking lot, toward their car, toward their lives. Sloane had her arm around Wesley. She was already talking to him about something else. That first night was the longest of my entire life, and I have spent nights with my hands inside a child who was dying, so I do not say that lightly. I tried to explain myself to a night aide, a tired young woman doing her rounds. I told her calmly, slowly, in the clearest words was I owned, that a mistake had been made, that I was a physician, that I was here against my will, that if she would only let me make one phone call, I could prove every word of it. She nodded along the whole time with such practiced patience, and when I was finished, she said, "You just try to get some rest now, Miss Francis. You're safe here." And she wrote a note in a chart by the door, and I watched her write it, and I knew without seeing the words exactly what they said. Patient agitated, patient confused, patient believes she is a doctor. I caught my own reflection in the dark window of that little room. A 71-year-old woman in a borrowed cardigan with a plastic band around her wrist, in a place where every true thing she said only proved her madness, where the sharper her mind cut, the more thoroughly it disappeared. The most trusted voice in any operating room. The one terrified parents prayed would come through the door. They had finally found the one room on earth where my voice meant nothing at all. I did not sleep. I sat on the edge of that bed in the dark, and I let myself feel the whole weight of it, the betrayal and the helplessness and the shame of having gotten into that car. And then, somewhere in the smallest hours of the morning, something strange began to happen behind my eyes. The frosted glass I had been living behind for months, the fog I had blamed on my age, began very faintly to lift. For the first time in longer than I could remember, my own mind was going quiet and clear and cold. I did not understand it yet, but by suns, I would. By the time the sun came up over that parking lot, I understood exactly what had been done to me, and not one piece of it had anything to do with my age. I lay there in the gray morning light, and I did the thing I had done 10,000 times across 40 years. I built a differential. A clear-minded woman does not develop months of creeping confusion that then evaporates in a single night the moment she misses one dose of her vitamins. Dementia does not lift like a fog burning off a lake. Dementia does not wait politely for you to stop taking a supplement and then hand you your mind back by sunrise. What I was feeling, this strange new sharpness, was not a miracle. It was a withdrawal. Something in that little case Sloane filled so lovingly every Sunday had been quietly switching off the lights in my head for the better part of a year, and now that I had gone one night without it, the lights were coming back on. And then I heard a 14-year-old boy's voice again, the one I had been too drugged to hear in that hospital room. "Mom mixes some powder into yours that she doesn't put in anybody else's." Beckett had handed me the entire case in one sentence, and I had floated right past it. I did not float past it now. It landed in my chest like a cold stone, and underneath the horror of it, I felt something I had not felt in a long, long time. I felt like a doctor again. Here is what most people do not understand about surgeons. We are not brave. We are simply trained, when everything is falling apart and a life is draining away under our hands, to go very still and very cold and start solving the problem in front of us. So I stopped crying. I stopped pleading with the walls. I sat up on the edge of that bed and I started solving the problem. And the very first thing the problem needed was proof. Whatever they had been giving me was clearing out of my body by the hour. If I wanted to prove it, I needed blood drawn today, while there might still be something left in me to find. So I changed my entire approach. Every instinct I had screamed at me to march to that locked door and demand to be let out. But I knew now that anger was exactly the symptom they had told everyone to expect. The harder I fought, the sicker I would look. So I went quiet instead. I was calm, I was cooperative. I was the most pleasant patient on that floor. I smiled, I ate my breakfast, I let them take my blood pressure, and the whole time I was doing what I have always done best. I was reading the room, mapping the staff, the schedules, the doors, looking for the one small opening I needed. It came faster than I expected, and it came in the worst possible way. Late that afternoon in the common room, an old man 2 chairs down from me put his fork down. When a terrible shade of gray and slumped, people froze. An aide called out for help, and before I had even decided to move, I was already across the room and on my knees beside him, 2 fingers on his carotid, my other hand tilting his chin, my voice coming out in the flat, steady cadence 40 years had carved into me. He's not choking, his airway is clear, he's having a cardiac event, me the crash cart and call it now. I have a weak, thready pulse. I did not sound confused. I did not sound like anyone's delusion. I sounded like the chief of surgery, because for that 1 minute, that is exactly who I was again. When the man was stable and the real staff had taken over, I looked up, and there was a nurse standing over me, frozen, staring at me like she had seen a ghost. She was a heavy-set woman in her early 60s, with kind, tired eyes, and those eyes were filling with tears right there on the floor of that common room. She read the name off my wristband, the one no one in that building had bothered to believe, and her hand went up to her mouth. "Hollis," she whispered. "Doctor. Francis Hollis. Oh, my Lord, you don't remember me, do you? But I have prayed for you every single night for 30 years. Her name was Camille Doyle, and 30 years ago, when I was still young and still building my name, a terrified girl who could not stop shaking had handed me a newborn boy who was blue and barely breathing, his heart no bigger than a walnut and quitting on him. I worked on that baby for 9 hours. He lived. He is a grown man now with children of his own. And his mother, that shaking girl, had grown into the night, nurse kneeling beside me on the floor of the one place on earth where my name was supposed to mean nothing. She had never forgotten me. She had been carrying my name around like a prayer for 3 decades, waiting for a chance that no one ever thinks will actually come. That night, when the floor was quiet, Camille pulled a chair up to my door and she did the simplest, most enormous thing anyone had done for me in a year. She believed me. She listened to the whole thing, the vitamins, the fog, the fall, the power of attorney, the briefing they had given the staff, and she did not nod at me the way you nod at the lost. She got angry, and then because she was angry, she told me the thing that turned my blood to ice. "Francis," she said, leaning close and dropping her voice, "I shouldn't be telling you this, but it's in your file. There's a court date. Your family filed for guardianship. The hearing is in 10 days. If a judge signs off, they get to make every decision for you for the rest of your life, and there won't be one single thing you can do about it. Honey, they are not parking you here. They are about to make it permanent. 10 days. That was the whole world now. 10 days to prove that the woman they had drugged into a fog was sharper than every person trying to lock her away. The next morning, Camille slipped me her own cell phone in a folded towel, and I made the first phone call of the rest of my life. I called Loretta. She answered on the second ring, and the moment she heard my voice, she made a sound I will never forget, half a sob and half a war cry. "Frankie," she said, "where on earth have you been? I have been calling for days, and Sloan keeps telling me you're resting and can't come to the phone, and deep down I knew something was wrong. I told her everything in 90 seconds flat, the way you give report on a crashing patient, and Loretta did not waste one breath on disbelief. "Tell me what you need," she said. So I told her, "I need Harlan Voss, I need an honest doctor, and I need someone to find my grandson." Within the hour, Loretta had Harlan Voss on the line, and Harlan, bless him, was already 3 moves ahead. Because the protections I had quietly asked him to build months earlier were sitting locked and loaded right where I had left them. "Francis," he said, "listen to me carefully. The good news is they cannot touch the heart of your estate. You saw to that yourself. But the guardianship is the real danger, because if they win that, the money stops mattering. They will own you. To beat it, we need 3 things and we need them fast. We need an independent competency evaluation from a physician a court will respect. We need you to formally revoke that power of attorney, which you have every legal right to do as a competent adult. And we need hard proof of what they have been putting in your body. Can you get me any of that from inside there? I could. Because the universe, having spent a year being so cruel to me, had finally placed exactly the right people in that building. Cedar Hollow's medical director was a man named Dr. Theo Marsh, a straight shooter with no stake in my family one way or the other. And when I sat across from him, as one physician to another, not as a frightened resident but as a colleague, and laid out my history symptom by symptom, he stopped seeing a chart and started seeing a case. I did not ask him to take my side. I asked him to do his job. Run a full cognitive battery on me, I said. Buy the book, document every result. And while you're at it, draw a tox panel today. Because if I'm right about what's been in those supplements, then the clock on the evidence is already running out. Marsh looked at me for a long moment, and then he did the most beautiful thing a person in that place could have done. He said, "All right, Dr. Hollis, let's find out the truth." And then there was Beckett. Loretta tracked him down through a friend of a friend, and when that boy heard his grandmother was locked in a memory ward, something in him that had been sick about all of this for months finally broke loose. He did not hesitate. He told Loretta everything he had seen, his mother at the kitchen counter crushing something into a packet and stirring it into my pill case, only mine, never anyone else's. And then he said the words that made my old eyes sting, because they were the words of a child choosing what was right over the woman who raised him. He told her, "I saved one of the packets. I knew something was wrong, so I kept one. It's in my backpack. A photograph would have been good. A teenager's witness statement would have helped, but a physical sample of the substance, kept by a child who had watched it being mixed, handed to an attorney and an adult protective services investigator named Paula Reinhardt, who opened a formal exploitation case the same afternoon. That was not a clue. That was a weapon. For the first time in a year, I went to sleep that night with a plan instead of a prayer. A competency evaluation in motion. A talk screen on its way to a lab. A revocation of power of attorney drawing on the page. An investigator on this case and a grandson brave enough to be my witness. 10 days had felt like a death sentence. Now it felt almost like enough time, which of course is exactly when Sloane realized the ground had started moving under her feet. Because the very next morning, before any of it could finish, the staff informed me, gently and immovably as always, that per a family request, I was no longer permitted phone calls or visitors of any kind. My daughter-in-law had felt the trap she built beginning to spring backward, and she was reaching for the only lever she had left. She was going to seal me off completely, race that hearing to the finish line, and shut the door before the truth could walk through it. She did not know the truth was already inside the building, and she had no idea it was about to walk out the front door wearing my face. What my daughter-in-law never understood is that you cannot lock a door against someone who is already standing on the right side of it. Her order sealed off my phone and my visitors, yes. But Dr. Theo Marsh was not a visitor. He was the medical director of the building, and he was already inside the trap with me, quietly doing his job. Paula Reinhardt was not a visitor either. She was a state investigator with a badge and the legal authority to walk through any door at Cedar Hollow she pleased, family request or no family request. Sloane had slammed shut a window while the whole roof was already coming off over her head. Dr. Marsh found me in the common room 2 days later, and he sat down across from me with a folder and an expression I recognized, because I had worn it myself 1,000 times when I had to tell a family the truth. "Dr. Hollis," he said, "I'll give it to you straight, the way I'd want it. Your cognitive evaluation is completely unremarkably normal. There is not one finding here consistent with dementia. Not one. Whoever wrote possible cognitive decline on your chart never tested a thing." He paused, and then he laid down the second page, and his jaw was tight. "And your blood told a very different story. There was a sedating compound in your system, the kind we would never give a healthy 71-year-old woman, the kind that would absolutely produce exactly the confusion everyone keeps describing. It is leaving your body now, which is why you feel like yourself. Dr. Hollis, somebody was poisoning your mind slowly on purpose. And I am going to put every word of that in writing. I had spent 40 years being the one who delivered the diagnosis. I had forgotten what it feels like to be the one who finally gets the truth out loud from someone you trust. I did not cry. I just closed my eyes and breathed, because a year of being told I was losing my mind ended in that single sentence. Somebody was poisoning your mind, not your age, not your fault, somebody. After that, it moved the way an avalanche moves, slow at the top and then all at once. I signed the revocation of the power of attorney with Harlan Voss standing beside me, and the moment that pen lifted off the page, every ounce of control I had handed my family at my own kitchen table came flooding back to me. Paula Reinhardt's exploitation case, now stacked with a competency evaluation, a positive toxicology panel, a grandson's sworn statement, and a sealed packet of the very substance, did not just survive. It became a freight train. And the guardianship petition my family had been racing toward the finish line, the one that was supposed to make me theirs forever, did not even make it to a courtroom. Faced with Marcia's report and an open abuse investigation, their own lawyer withdrew it within 48 hours, because no attorney on earth wants to stand in front of a judge and argue that a fully competent, demonstrably drugged surgeon belongs in a locked ward. And so, on a bright, cold morning, I walked out the front doors of Cedar Hollow on my own 2 feet. The same doors they had marched me through with a hand on each of my arms, I walked back through alone, with my chin up and my mind clear, and Loretta waiting for me in the parking lot with the car, running and tears streaming down her face. They had carried me in as a patient. I left as exactly who I had always been. But I want to be honest with you about what came next, because this is the part the angry little voice in all of us craves, and it is also the part I take the least joy in. While I had been inside, Harlan Voss had been getting ready. Everything I had quietly asked him to protect months earlier, back when I still could not let myself believe my own son would hurt me, was sitting locked and ready. Here is what my family had never once stopped to understand. The beautiful house they lived in was not theirs. It had never been theirs. It was held inside one of my trusts, the way I had structured things years before, for reasons that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with how careful wealthy families keep their wealth. The cars were leased through an entity I controlled. Even Wesley's landscaping and contracting business, the one he described at parties as finally taking off, ran on a line of credit I had quietly backed from the beginning. They had spent years living inside a life I owned, and the entire arrangement only ever held together on one single assumption: that I would never, under any circumstances, actually pull it out from under them. That was the real shock. Not that they did not know who held the titles. They knew. Sloan had signed plenty of paperwork over the years. The shock was discovering that the soft floor they had always stood on could be taken away, and that the old woman they had drugged and locked up was now the one deciding whether to take it. I did not do it cruelly. I did not do it all at once like some movie. What can be cut fast in real life gets cut fast and the rest grinds slow, and I let the law set the pace. By 9 that first morning, the credit cards tied to my accounts were dead. Sloan found out at a grocery store, standing at the register with a full cart, when the card came back, declined, and then declined again. Wesley found out when his business account, the one floated by my credit line, simply stopped working in the middle of a payroll run. Those things happen in a day, because money you control directly, you can stop in a day. The house was slower, and that is the truth of how these things actually go. You cannot throw a family out of a home overnight, not even your own, not even when you own it. So Harlan filed what had to be filed, and a certified letter went out, and a clock began to tick that would take weeks, not minutes. There was no dramatic eviction at dawn. There was just a quiet legal notice in a mailbox and the slow, grinding understanding settling over 2 adults that the life they had built on my back was being unbuilt, one lawful step at a time. The voicemails started that afternoon, and I saved every one of them. The first was almost charming in its denial. Francis, hi. There's clearly been some kind of mix-up with the cards. Can you call the bank when you get a chance? Thanks. The next, an hour later, had an edge. Francis, the business account is frozen. This is actually a really big problem. I need you to fix this today. And then by evening, the mask was gone entirely, and what came through the speaker was the voice I should have heard a year before. You are insane, she hissed into my voicemail. You are going to do this to your own grandchildren over a misunderstanding. You wouldn't actually take the house. You would never actually do that to family. You would never actually do that. There it was, the whole rotten foundation in one sentence. For years, their entire kingdom had rested on the certainty that I would never, that I loved them too much, needed them too much, feared losing the grandchildren too much to ever close my hand. They had built a life on the bet that I was too soft to ever say no and mean it. They had bet wrong, and my Wesley left only one message that whole day, and it was not angry. It came late, his voice low and cracked, and all he said was, Mom, what is happening? What did Sloan do? Please, just call me. I don't understand any of this. There was no demand in it. There was only a man standing in the wreckage of a story he had believed, finally beginning to see that the woman beside him had built it, and beginning far too late to be afraid of what that meant. I did not call him back. Not yet. There was a meeting being arranged in Harlan Voss's conference room, with Paula Reinhardt present and a court reporter in the corner, where the four walls of this thing would finally come down, and the truth would have to be spoken to my family's faces, all of it, including the parts not one of us was ready to say out loud. I had survived their worst. Now I had to do the harder thing. I had to look my own son in the eye and decide in front of everyone whether there was anything left in him worth saving. I had survived a great many terrible rooms in my life. None of them frightened me the way Harlan Voss's quiet conference room did. The morning I sat down across a long table from my son and his wife, with a state investigator at one end and a court reporter typing softly in the corner. Sloan went first, and she came in exactly the way I expected, polished and reasonable and already rewriting history. Look, she said, folding her hands like a woman chairing a meeting. I think we can all admit things got a little out of hand here. We were genuinely worried about Francis. Maybe we handled it badly, maybe some lines got crossed, but everyone in this room loves her, sir, and I really think if we all just take a breath, we can settle this like a family instead of dragging lawyers and the state into our private business. She actually smiled at me. A misunderstanding, she called it. She sat 3 feet from the woman she had spent a year feeding a sedative to, and she called it a misunderstanding. I did not raise my voice. I have learned that the truth lands hardest when you set it down gently. I simply let Paula Reinhardt slide the documents into the center of the table, one after another. The competency evaluation, the toxicology report, the intake notes where the staff had been instructed in advance to treat every true word I spoke as a symptom. And last, in a clear evidence bag, the little packet a 14-year-old boy had been brave enough to keep. I looked at Sloan and I said, this is not a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is a missed phone call. This is the floor plan of a thing you built on purpose, brick by brick, over a year, and the only mistake in it was assuming I would never wake up. Her smile finally faltered then, just for a second, and in that second I saw, plain as day, that she was not sorry. She was only sorry it had stopped working. And then there was my son. Wesley had not said a single word. He sat slumped beside her, staring at that evidence bag like it was a living thing, and when I turned to him, the dam simply broke. He put his face in his hands, and he started to come apart in a way I had not seen since he was a small boy. Mom, he said, and his voice was wrecked. Mom, I swear to God, I swear on my children, I didn't know about the pills. I didn't know she told them to ignore you. I thought you were really sick. I thought I was doing the right thing. I believed her. He looked up at me, and his face was the face of a man drowning. What kind of son believes that? He whispered. What kind of son just believes it? That was twist enough for one lifetime, to learn that my boy had been a coward and a fool, but not a monster, that he had handed me over not out of greed, but out of a weakness so total he had stopped questioning the person beside him years ago. But it was not the deepest thing in that room, because then through the tears, the wound that had been festering in him for 36 years finally tore open. You want to know why it was so easy, he said, why I let her convince me. because some part of me wanted it to be true that you needed me. Do you have any idea what it's like to spend your whole life being the kid whose mother was always saving somebody else? He was not shouting. That was the worst of it. He was almost gentle. I was 5 years old the day Dad died, Mom. 5. And they wouldn't let me see you. And you know what they told me? They told me, Mommy can't come right now. Mommy's in the operating room with another little boy. My dad was dying and you were saving a stranger's kid. And I sat in that waiting room and I waited for you and you didn't come. And I spent every year after that watching the same thing happen over and over. The recitals, the games, every empty chair. You saved everybody's child but mine. And when Sloan started whispering that you'd never really choose us, that you'd let it all rot in a trust before you ever gave it to your own grandkids, God help me, Mom, it was easy to believe, because it was the story I already knew by heart. I want to tell you that I had a perfect answer. I did not. I sat there and I let it hit me full in the chest, every word of it, because every word of it was true. That was the day I understood that you can be right about everything and still have failed the one person who needed you most. They had drugged me and locked me away, and that was their sin. But the empty chairs, those were mine, and no toxicology report in the world was ever going to clear me of them. So I did not defend myself. For the first time in my life, in front of my son, I just told the truth. Wesley, I said, and my own voice was not steady. You are right. I did choose other people's children over and over, and I told myself it was for you, that I was building you a safe and provided life, and that was a lie I needed so I could keep cutting. The day your father died, I was in the middle of an operation, a boy whose belly I had open on my table, and I could not walk away from a child, bleeding out to stand in a hallway, where there was already nothing left to be done for your father. By the time I scrubbed out, Ted was gone, and someone had already taken you home. You waited for me, and I did not come. I have never once regretted saving that boy's life, and I have never stopped regretting that I was not there to hold yours that day, or on 100 days after it. I have been sorry for 36 years, and I was too proud and too busy and too afraid to ever say it out loud. So I am saying it now in front of God and a court reporter. I am sorry. The room was very quiet. And then I told them the last thing, the thing that turned the whole scheme to ash, because they needed to hear how pointless their cruelty had always been. I had quietly seen the shape of this coming a long time ago, I said. Not the locked ward, never that. I never once imagined you would go that far. But the money, the slow reaching for the money, I saw that years back, and I made my arrangements. The bulk of my estate, nearly all of it, has been promised since before any of this began to a pediatric cardiac fund in your father's name, so that children whose hearts are failing will get the help his never did. You drugged me and caged me and broke this family in half, fighting over an inheritance that was never coming to you in the first place. There was nothing in that trust for you to win. There never was. Sloan made a small sound, and I will not pretend I did not feel something at it. But I did not say it to wound her. I said it because it was true, and because the truth was the only thing left in that room with any power. Then I made my choice, the hardest one of my life, harder than any cut. I told them I would not be coming after them with everything I had. The state would deal with what the state had to deal with, and the law would take its own course on the poison and the rest of it. And that was no longer in my hands. But I would not spend my last good years trying to bury my own grandchildren's parents in courtrooms. To Wesley, I said, there is a door here, and it is narrow, and it has nothing to do with money, because money is exactly what rotted this from the start. If you want a mother, you have to become a son, and you have to do it on your own 2 feet, and I will meet you halfway and not 1 inch further. And to Sloan, who sat there dry-eyed and calculating even now, I said only the truth I could see. You are not sorry yet. Maybe one day you will be. I hope, for the sake of those children, that you get there. But that is a longer road than the one in front of Wesley, and you are going to have to walk it without me holding your hand. I had cut the tumor out. What I did not know yet, walking out of that room, was whether the patient would live, and which one of them, if any, would choose to. It has been a little over a year now since I walked out of those locked doors, And I have learned that the question I carried out of that conference room, which one of them would choose, did not get answered all at once. It got answered slowly, the way real healing always does, one small true thing at a time. Wesley chose. That is the part that still catches in my throat. He did not fight me over the house. When the legal notice finally ran its course, he could have dragged it out for months, could have made it ugly, could have hidden behind the grandchildren the way they always had. Instead, he came to me on his own, and he said, "Mom, we're going to find our own place. I don't want anything that isn't mine anymore. I need to know I can stand on my own 2 feet, even if it's a smaller pair of shoes," and he did. He took a steady job managing a property company. Nothing glamorous, the exact kind of unexciting work he had spent his whole life quitting, and this time he stayed. No irons in the fire. No next big thing. Just a man getting up every morning and doing the work, because somewhere in that terrible year he had finally found the bottom and discovered he could stand on it. He comes to Thursday dinners now, and here is how I know he has changed. He never asks me for anything, not once in a year. He fixes the loose board on my porch steps. He sits and lets me tell the same story twice, and he does not trade a glance with anyone. We are not fully mended, he and I. You do not undo 36 years of empty chairs in 12 months. But we are doing the work, both of us, and that is more than I ever earned and more than I dared to hope for. Beckett is the one who saved me, and now he is the one who sits at my elbow, asking how it all works. "Grandma," he said one afternoon, staring at the wall of cards in my study, "can you actually show me how you fixed a heart that small?" I am teaching him. He wants to be a doctor. Of all the things to come out of that wreckage, that boy turning his courage toward medicine is the one I would not trade for any fortune on earth. Little Wren is still too young to understand much of it, but she calls me on her own now, just to talk, and a year ago she only ever called when there was something somebody wanted. I wish I could tell you that everyone was made whole. They were not, and I made myself a promise that I would always tell you the truth. Sloan and I are not reconciled. She faced what the law required her to face for what she put in my body, and her marriage to my son is a fragile, complicated thing that the two of them are still deciding about behind a closed door I do not knock on. She sent me an apology, eventually, written in beautiful, careful sentences, and I read it twice, and I felt almost nothing, because I have spent 40 years reading people, and I could not find the woman underneath the words. Maybe she will get there someday. I genuinely hope she does, for those children's sake. But I have stopped waiting for it, and I have stopped needing it, and there is a great deal of peace in finally setting a thing down that was never yours to carry. Loretta and I are back in our booth every Thursday, same terrible coffee, same mints. Camille Doyle and I have lunch once a month, and her grown son, the blue baby I held 30 years ago, calls me Aunt Frances now. The fund in Ted's name is growing, and somewhere out there children whose hearts are failing are getting a chance my husband never got. And the wall in my study is still there, corner to corner, floor to ceiling. I look at it differently now. Every card is still a child who got to grow up. But I have finally made my peace with the chair that sat empty, because I have learned far too late and just barely in time that the people who truly love you are not the ones who need you to keep saving them. They are the ones who would rather you saved yourself. People think a surgeon's hardest job is the cutting. It isn't. The hardest part is knowing when a heart can still be saved and when you have to let go.
For 40 years, I could tell the difference in seconds. With my own family, it took nearly losing everything to see it. Wesley's heart was not beyond repair. Sloane's, I am still not sure. And that is the truth nobody puts in the inspirational videos. Love does not always heal cleanly, and forgiveness is not a switch you flip. But this I know. Generosity without boundaries is not love, it is an open wound, and people who truly love you will never ask you to keep bleeding to prove it. They left me somewhere they thought I would be forgotten. Instead, I remembered exactly who I was.